I'll actually be able to see the light from time to time. And these are 90-minute tapes, so at 45 minutes I'll be watching, to turn this over. Let me get you to say something and see if your voice is picking up naturally.
Okay, well, I'm glad you were able to come today.
Thank you.
Did it come up?
All right. This is an interview with Representative Dorothy Felton. The date is Friday, March the 25th, 1988. Representative Felton is from the 22nd District in Fulton County in the Georgia General Assembly, House of Representatives. The interviewer is Professor Diane Foltz. Let's begin with family background. We have a brief section on family background. Where were you born and reared?
I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was reared there. Went to the Tulsa Public Schools, and was graduated from the University of Arkansas, where I went for 4 years.
The University at Fayetteville.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What did your father do for a living?
He was had originally been in the oil business, but was in the advertising specialty business and the sales end. And my mother was a school teacher.
And what did she teach?
She taught English. English, which we, had the advantage of having an English teacher for a mother. We could always, on an English paper, be able to remember how we said it at home, and whether we knew always why we had the verb in the right place or not. We knew what to, generally, the proper English to speak, which is helpful.
Right.
Particularly this day and time.
Yeah. Now, you talked about where you went to school. What was your major in college?
I majored in journalism.
So you continued that writing interest.
Mm-hmm.
And what were your major interests and activities in school and then in college?
Well, I was interested in the journalism end of it, and in high school, a senior was always selected by the Tulsa Tribune to write a column, so I got to do that my senior year, and we had that was excellent school system, progressive, and we had the school newspaper and a journalism department there. And in college, my minor was in history. I liked that. I was interested in a lot of the, naturally going to a Southwest Conference school, was interested in football and the spectator kind of sports.
And how did you get interested in journalism in high school?
I actually always wanted to major in journalism. Starting about the 6th grade, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And it was something, I don't, I didn't have anybody else in my family that was interested in that. So it was just something that I was vitally interested in, and how I originally got the idea, I don't know, but that's...
Yeah, was there some figure outside your family, or was it the era in which you were growing up, or?
Well, it might have been that I didn't want to be a school teacher, and that was a field that was open to women more than another one. And Inez Robb, who had been an international news correspondent, and was one of my, heroines. And then in college, I was a member of Delta Gamma sorority, and it turned out that she was an alumni, and I covered the Democratic National Convention for the Tulsa Tribune after I graduated from college, and was there and had an opportunity to work with her a little bit during that. She took me back and forth in the press cars and things like that, since I was kind of just a lowly reporter that was there, but it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. Which Democratic convention was that?
It was in 1952.
So the year Stevenson was?
That was Stevenson, yes.
Yeah. That was
you look too young to be able to
remember I remember
that.
some of those things.
Now that was Albert Barkley, remember, was
Yes.
the vice president, and it was
Yes,
kind
from
of swan
Kentucky.
song. That's
Yeah.
right. He came and he
Right.
was the big attraction at that convention
Yeah.
at that particular time. I was married the next year, and my husband to be and present husband was a Democrat, and he
Uh-huh.
voted for Stevenson, and I was a Republican, and he voted for Eisenhower.
Yeah.
But by the time Eisenhower was sworn in, we were married, so it was. In fact, on that subject, he says that he used to be a Christian and a Democrat, and now he's a Republican and a Methodist. His family were members of the Christian Church,
Yeah.
the United Brethren.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, actually, you've answered, the next question was, what did you do when you finished your schooling? Marry or go to work, begin a career, or what?
Well,
And
I began a
you-
career really in thinking I would, be a career woman
Mhm.
at that point. I mean, I wasn't, I had been raised with the concept that you get an education and you have a career and you do something, you don't just get married. But of course, I started school in '46,
Mhm.
and that was the year that started college.
Mhm.
That all of the veterans were returning.
Right.
And so there was, I think, 7 male students to each female.
Mhm.
So a lot of my activity was spent dating,
Yeah.
which was uninteresting and, time to go through school.
Right.
But that was a good experience.
But nevertheless, you did that and prepared for a
That's
career
right. I
and-
was, yes,
and
we were
started
always
one.
encouraged to get a college education.
Yeah. And then after you married, did you continue working as a reporter, or?
No, we moved here. My husband was I met him because I had a twin brother. He is deceased now, but he had been in ROTC, and when he graduated from college, he was during the Korean War,
Mhm.
and he went into the Air Force. And then Jerry, my husband, had been recalled because
Mhm.
that was at the height of the Korean War. And so I met through him. He visited in our home. And so he was later got out within 6 months after we were married. But so the first 6 months he was in the Air Force,
Mhm.
and we were in Las Vegas. And then he had been with a company out of Memphis,
Mhm.
and they sent him to Atlanta.
Oh.
And so we've been here ever since. He changed from that company the next year to a local firm here.
And what is
He's in
his,
the advertising business, in the trade magazines.
Mm,
He sells advertising.
Mhm.
He's with Connors Publishing Company now.
okay. Where had he gone to school before he went into the Air Force?
Well, he went during the I guess at one of the worst times that you go into the Army at age 18,
Mhm.
and was in the South Pacific, and actually was on Tinian where the atomic bomb was
Yeah,
flown
yeah.
from, and he had flown over Japan, so
Mhm.
he was just he went in as a I'm sure he enlisted, but
Mhm.
the same as a draftee.
Yeah.
And then after he came back from school, from the service,
Mhm.
he went to the first 2 years to a small college called Randolph-Macon College right outside of Richmond, which
Mhm.
is Ashland, and it was then a boys' school. It's not the Randolph-Macon College for women.
Yeah. It was the one for boys.
That's
Or for
right.
men.
It's now coeducational.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And in fact, our older son went there his first year.
Uh-huh.
And then, but my husband went on to the University of Virginia
Uh-huh.
after that.
And then on out, and you met him.
And then, yes, then he went into the business world, and then, as I say, was recalled, and that's
Mhm.
how I met him.
Yeah.
He and my brother had met in Texas, and they both were sent to an officer's maintenance school in Illinois. So
Mhm.
as Jerry drove through, he stopped because he and George were friends,
Mhm.
and met our family and had dinner with us, and that's how we actually met.
Mhm. And then you've mentioned one of your sons.
I
How
have
many
two sons.
children?
I have two sons. One that is now 32 and is married and has two children,
Mhm.
and one that is 29 who is not married.
Mhm. And what do they do?
The oldest son graduated from the University of Georgia, and he liked Randolph-Macon, but really couldn't wait to get to the University of
Mhm.
Georgia. And my husband said, he really gave up an opportunity for an education to come to the 24-hour nightclub. But I was very pleased with the education he got at the University of Georgia. He graduated from the business school and was very well trained. And the first job I guess the second job he got was because of the grades he had made in the business school.
Mhm.
And he accomplished at the university what I wanted him to get out of a small independent liberal arts
Mhm.
school. He and his wife both, they are interested in literature, they're interested in current affairs. He was well trained to make a living.
Yeah.
And that's what you send people to school for.
Yeah.
And have a lifetime of learning. And I mean, he reads prolifically and is involved. He's mainly spends all of his time on his business and with his family, since
Yeah.
they have two small children, but has lots of interests that he'll be able to explore later on.
Yeah.
And my younger son, he's the oldest son is in computers,
Mhm.
as with a computer company, and has been quite successful. He's just changed to a large computer company now. But in fact, his smallest item that he sells is $1 million.
Oh my goodness.
So he's
He's in
just
the hardware.
that's right.
end of it.
That's right. And my younger son graduated from Georgia Southern. He'd done everything. He was actually 4 years behind Jethro, the
Mhm.
oldest son, in school, even though there was 3 years difference in ages.
Mhm.
One had a January birthday, another had a December birthday. But he had done everything that you do at the University of Georgia, I think, except attend classes. So he attended Georgia Southern
Yeah.
and is now in the same profession field that my husband is in, and is doing quite well.
Good.
He has a similar personality as my husband, and it's I kind of pushed him in that direction, and it worked out after he had gone into the computer
Mhm.
field, like his brother, that he is now into the advertising and loves it.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
Good. Are they involved in politics in any way?
They were during the time Brian, the youngest, was 16 when I ran for office, and was in high school. So I basically, that was one of the things I did, is set him down and said, I'm going to run for office.
Mhm.
Now, if you're going to sit around on the corner and smoke pot or do all these things that kids are getting
Mhm.
into now, I'm not going to do it, because I don't want people to say she ought to be home taking care of her children. But they helped me. We used to distribute literature, and they'd cover half the district, and the other cover the other half. And they did little things like that when they were in school. They're interested. I don't think they would be. I don't know. They might someday. They mainly are interested in the business world,
Mhm.
and they feel. And I guess it's the influence of my husband, that you have to be. You have to make a living in the world, and
Yeah.
they're interested in doing that at this point. And maybe at some time, they're both pretty well versed on a lot of things that go on and behind the scenes, because they went with me to, they've attended all kinds of events
Yeah.
with me. And so they've been able to make the determination of who's in it and who's fakey and who's for real and what. So they've had that dimension.
Yeah.
They don't have any starry-eyed. I know one friend of mine who's in the legislature, and I was talking to his son, and his son was talking about how excited it was to go with his daddy, and he saw all the glamour side.
Mm-hmm.
But I think mine have seen a little bit more of the realistic side of looking into people and what
Yeah.
their motivations
Uh-huh.
are.
Yeah.
And politics isn't really that much different than a lot of, be it an
Other
educator,
things.
you're involved
Right.
in politics, being in the business world, you're
Yeah.
company politics and stuff like that.
Yeah. Now, moving into the political area directly, when and how did you first get interested in politics? And now we're talking kind of generally,
Mhm.
thinking back. When did that start for you?
Okay. I guess while my children were younger, and I was involved in a lot of issue-oriented groups, the United Methodist Women and the
Mhm.
League of Women Voters, and it was also during the time of the Vietnam War. And my husband and I had, made a commitment to raising a family and to trying to make our society better. We were active members of our church, and Jerry really couldn't run for office. He didn't. He felt like that the best thing he could do for society was to keep us off of welfare, so he worked. But and I had encouraged him to run but that was when I saw the opportunity out here that we were not represented too well, and felt like I naturally would promote my husband to do that. So I really decided that the way to make change in our government was to get involved on the local level,
Mhm.
and the office that was closest to us, and that happened to be the state representative out here, since this is an unincorporated area.
Mhm.
And it's been kind of interesting because, last time I went as a delegate to the National Convention
In '84.
in '84, and also have a good bit of input on who's going to be our representative from Georgia.
Mhm.
A woman and a man both are selected to be on the platform
Mhm.
committee from each state, and I think my designee will be on that.
Mhm.
And so that'll make a real difference. So I can say after all 14 years that it does help to get involved.
Mhm.
You can't see always the progress you make, but I feel strongly we need to have well-educated, rational people that are not there just to move in just one narrow direction. And so I think that it'll work out, that we'll be able to, I hope, have an influence on the national platform.
And what happens
Yes,
in the coming
that's right.
convention in New
Mhm.
Orleans? this
That's
summer?
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, what in your background would you say prepared you to get interested in politics? What in your experience growing up?
We had, as I've mentioned, we had a good school system in Tulsa. It was an independent school system. We had a well-developed junior high school, and we had intense social studies, and that was driven home the responsibilities that you have, and if you don't follow through, or if you take away someone else's rights, that your rights will be taken away, and I think that had a big influence. I can remember two teachers in particular that that drove this fact home. My family were not involved in a political party, but stayed abreast of the news and were very opinionated on what they thought was right and wrong in government.
Yeah.
Always voted.
Do you think your journalism prepared you?
I really do. I think that you have a vital interest in what's going on in the, when you're on a newspaper and you feel like you can make a difference and and I think if you've got that desire to, the two go together beautifully, because there just is a relationship and a concern about what is going on in society.
As a journalist, you can kind of say what is going on, and as someone in politics, you can try to shape
That's right.
what's going on. But both take an inquiring
I think so.
mind.
I think there is. In fact, a good many people that are in politics have had a journalism background. Peggy Childs, I don't know whether you interviewed her or
No,
not.
I did not get a chance to. I was very sorry.
Had that background, and Sally Newville, who has just been elected out here as the state senator, has that, and Paul Coverdale does, and several people that I've known of do. So I think the two do go hand in hand very closely.
Yeah. So when and how did you first decide to run for office? You talked just a while ago about the opportunity, I think.
Well,
how did you see that?
Well, there were several of us in the North Fulton County, Sandy Springs area who were concerned about the school system. And we had all come from other school systems and knew that we could do more. And our ideas were not too well received in South Fulton. We decided we did need an elected school board, and we couldn't get our local representative to introduce the bill, but did get a representative from South Fulton to introduce the bill to change it, which didn't pass. And so we were really concerned about our local school system, getting that changed, and about education in general in Georgia. And so we decided, and then we found that when we investigated our own state representative, that he was maybe not as interested in some of these causes that we were.
Was this a group of Republicans?
No, we weren't. We were really we were really just educated oriented. PTA. All of us belonged to the PTA, but all of us were active in different churches and different civic organizations. But our common denominator was being in the PTA, and we were actually on an advisory committee to the Fulton County Schools.
Yeah.
So there was a group, with a mutual interest.
Yeah, kind of a grassroots.
Yes, very grassroots.
Group.
That's right.
Growing out of education.
That's right. And then at that point, just we were maybe those that had been here and had determined we were going to stay. This was a new developing area.
Yeah.
And there were a few that felt that way. At that point, about out of every 5 families, 3 moved about every 3 to 4 years. Now we've evolved into an entirely different kind of community since then. But that was kind of the beginning of a large number of permanent residents who had come from other areas. Most everybody out here is from another area in the United States. Were educated other places.
Right. So how did it come about that you were the one that kind of picked up the gauntlet, so to speak?
I don't even actually, I don't even remember when that actually came about. I really don't. I don't remember how I happened to be the one. It was really kind of all of us doing it, and whether I just don't remember how I happened to be the one that everyone happened to identify as being the candidate possibilities. But it did just kind of occur like that.
Yeah. And at that point, well, you had been a Republican, so.
Well, I had before we lived here, we had lived in DeKalb County, and I had gone to some Republican things, but it was kind of a closed party. And then when we moved here, I went to a Republican meeting. Again, there was the attitude that they didn't really want too many people involved. and it was a closed shop situation, so I didn't spend much time, I didn't spend any time at all doing that. I went ahead and just did things that were community oriented. So I actually was, considered the non-Republican in that race simply because I'd always voted Republican, had come from a Republican family. My grandfather had been the first national committeeman in Oklahoma, so I had the basic Republican background of why the party, the philosophy that the party was founded on, which was not the same as some of the people that were at that point in the party, because I most of them were Democrats that had come in. I called them mad Democrats and former Ku Klux Klanners. But they weren't. But the people, there were a lot of people like me that couldn't identify with them, that had been Republicans in other areas where Republicanism stood for conservative fiscal policy and letting the free enterprise system operate without government intervention. And so anyway, I ran, and the quote little party out here supported another candidate, and but I think because I'd been involved in the community and they weren't as involved in the community, they'd isolated themselves, and I think it was simply because I had the community involvement that I was able to beat them. In fact, there were 3 others
in the primary,
which I won with. There were 4 total, which I won without a runoff. So that the community involvement, I think, did that.
Yeah, that says a lot about being able to win in that kind of situation without a runoff. This may be kind of a duplication, but what would you say in your background and experience has prepared you to run for office, to actually run for office? Do the things that you needed to do to run.
You mean just the campaign and things like that, the nitty gritty? Working with people, being well organized, and I also had the time to be to give full time to the campaign, whereas someone who was full-time employed could not do that. And so I think that knowing how to work with people and knowing a number of people that were interested in getting them involved, that helped in doing just the campaign part.
How did you organize your first campaign? How did you go about getting organized, once you had
Decided
declared for office?
I had, as I say, this little grassroots group, and 2 members of the group would, we scheduled coffees about every day in different neighborhoods, and one of them went with me, and then we, to introduce me at each group, and to kind of, we had a book to sign, and we had a centerpiece, so we, people didn't have to fuss. We just, said, we'll bring the centerpiece and you provide the styrofoam cups and coffee. And that made it easy. And then I did get a friend of mine who was a school teacher to work full-time in the campaign office, which was in my basement, and which full-time was from about 10 to 3. And we decided that we weren't going to do it on the weekends, that we were going to not interfere with our own tranquility within the families, and that we would be able to get things done. And so we had then volunteer day chairmen for each day, who in turn got 4 or 5 volunteers for the morning and 4 or 5 for the afternoon on the day that she was the chairman. So that's how we actually organized.
And this was mainly during the summer.
It was a summer
going into the
campaign.
primary.
It was.
So
It was a summer campaign.
And given what you've already said, were these really a lot of people connected with the PTA?
Yes,
Kind of
and
parents
church and
teachers
things
and
like
church
that.
people,
That's
all
right.
concerned about
Education.
this educational system.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it was fairly easy to get volunteers.
Yes, I had a lot of
gather. Yeah.
volunteers.
Uh-huh.
And that helped.
Yeah. I have a question here. Did you seek the support of groups or individuals, or did they seek you out?
No, I really didn't, because this being an unincorporated area, we didn't have that many organized groups to do it. And since I was running against, quote, the little House District Republican
Yeah.
Party here, I didn't have their help. I did, though, the state party chairman lived in the district, and he was fair. And
Who was that at the time?
that was Bob Shaw.
Mm.
And he came to all of the candidates. All of us, had at least one function that he came to. And I was trying to think of any. I don't think there really were. I was interviewed by the AFL-CIO and groups like that, but I didn't seek their support. It would have probably been, a minus in this area to receive that anyway. I did get the endorsement of GAE among, and that was just because of the way I guess I answered the questionnaire as compared to the others that were in the race.
But it really sounds like there was a kind of interaction going on. You were part of a community group that was concerned about education, and it included educators, parents, church people. So it just kind of evolved.
It did, right.
Naturally. Was money a problem? Did you need to raise money? Was raising money a problem? How did that work?
I did hire a campaign consultant who was Helen Bullock. Are you familiar with Helen?
I've heard her name.
And Helen had like a 95% rate in electing people. And she did a little interview, or a little survey kind of, to see if I was electable. And Melton Ferris had appointed me about 2 or 3 years before that to the Fulton County Personnel Board. And she had handled Melton's campaigns as well as all of the mayors up to that point. So I had her advice on things which helped tremendously, and I think that was money well spent, because you are unsure of things. And so I did she did a lot of advising, what would be a good way to do things.
Yeah, so did you have some contributors kind of at the beginning who?
Well, my husband and I put in $2,000, and then my friends in this group contributed, and she, advised me on how to send out a campaign letter and requesting money. We had a finance committee that did that, and so people's contributions, just 25, 10, 50, 100.
Yeah.
I don't think I had anything over $100.
Yeah.
But
So kind of core group, and then
people's
more widespread,
yes.
small contributions. Yeah.
But no big contributions.
Yeah.
At that point in time.
And in this kind of a district, do you need that much money to run?
Back then,
This is 1975.
That's right.
This is first.
it was actually 74, yeah,
74,
when we
yeah.
ran. No, you don't need TV and radio money. And we didn't rent a place for the campaign office. I have an outside entrance to my basement, which is a daylight basement, and that was a pleasant place for people to congregate. And so direct mail was the main thing you need money for, and printing your brochure and printing.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
And that doesn't cost as much as buying advertising
No,
space
absolutely not.
radio and television.
Mailing is very expensive now, but it's still nothing to compare with advertising.
Right. Mentioning the year 1974 reminded me that was a year, it was what we call post-Watergate. It was just post-Watergate.
Right.
And there was a kind of mood in the country of throwing the rascals out and,
That's right.
and bringing in new
In fact,
blood.
that's when I remember during that summer was when Nixon actually went out of office.
Yeah.
And I had determined that I've always believed in our form of government and had read the Federalist Papers and John Locke and all those things that went to develop our Constitution and things like that. And Thomas Jefferson has always been one of my heroes. So I determined that we would never do anything, the campaign, that would not be really constructive for government. Not run a negative campaign and just see if it would work. It was kind of an experiment to see if you could just talk about the issues and talk about what needed to be done, and it worked.
Yeah.
I didn't get involved in a mudslinging kind of thing.
So that definitely did play a part.
It did. It
in
absolutely
the
did.
whole
And I
context.
decided that, yes, it was important for us to rebuild the Republican Party in what it had the potential to be and had been in the past.
Yeah. Now, in the general election, the incumbent.
No, I didn't. In the incumbent, after I announced to run, changed and ran for the Senate, and there was no incumbent in the race when it turned out. And then I had no opposition in the general election.
So your only opposition was in the primary,
that's
and
right.
it turned out to be minimal, though you never know that when
You
you're
don't
going
know
in,
it,
do you?
that's right.
Yeah. And well, that's very interesting.
So
that
I was elected in the primary.
Yeah. So you went into an open seat, basically.
That's
as
right.
It turned out.
As it turned out.
Yeah. So what did you do?
That's probably why the other three got in the race, because they thought it would be a good opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. But the incumbent announced for the Senate seat after you had. So
Yes.
when you went in expecting to challenge
Yes, absolutely.
an incumbent if you got the nomination. Yeah.
Right. Well, I expected to run against the incumbent during the primary. The incumbent was a Republican.
All right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was, and that was Helen's recommendation. I announced early. I had his voting record, and his campaign manager and I talked, and it was a woman, and I think he did have a very poor attendance record in some of the things, so I think that did motivate him to move into the other race.
Yeah. Oh, so what did you do during the general election? Just kind of.
Well, let's see.
Keep in touch.
I went into each department head of government. They gave me time to do things that you don't get to do, and I did go into each department of the major departments of government and kind of do it in the state level and did an overview of that. And I did that kind of preparation.
Yeah. Kind of starting to work on your homework.
That's right. Yes.
Now, having won that first election, then, how did you approach your first term in office? How did you learn the ropes? How did you
Right,
get started?
how'd you get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I felt as ill prepared. A third of the House was new then, because I had been involved in, as I say, issue groups and knew somewhat what was going on. But in your committee work, you follow the first time around. You're not as familiar with all the bills and things like that, so you read and study those, and you attend everything, absolutely everything, and those start in November. So then all through the session.
Are these like receptions?
Yes, and also briefings and lobbyists who have issues that they're concerned about. And the big bill, the first session was the bank holding bill. And before the election, had a man in my district represented the small independent bankers, and when he described the bill to me, it sounded like something I could support. But as I got in and really studied the bill and talked to a number of other people and read a lot of material from states that had passed it, I realized that I couldn't really support his position. You know, so I learned early, you know, you don't tell somebody you're going to support something until you see the actual bill.
Yeah.
But I did advise him of that before I voted.
Yeah.
And but I just attended all the committee meetings and I was very active. Atlanta started, there was some rumblings about annexing this area, so that got me as the representative involved in that. And then the next year, well, let's see, also the governor was new, and he had been, it was George Busby, and he had been, had talked about kindergartens, and I had talked about kindergartens, and I know someone said to me, how's a freshman legislator going to be able to get kindergartens? Well, it worked out we got kindergartens, but George Busby had that in his platform too.
Yeah.
But I was one of 7 that he had identified on the floor that was interested in that, and I helped on the floor. And we went around the state, had a little support group during the session,
Yeah.
his wife and I and several others, to talk to groups about that. So I helped him on that issue. And then also after that session, I knew that the 5th District post of the State School Board, the appointment was coming up, and the person that represented this district was not involved in education and really was not a good representative. And so I nominated Sarah Lynn Oberdorfer. I spent a lot of time getting other people to support her, talking to George Busby about her, and he had said that he would support a person who, on these boards, that were really interested and qualified and not as political payoffs. And so I got real involved with the administration by doing that, and he did at about the 2nd or 3rd week of the next session, that appointment was made, and he did appoint her. So I spent a lot of time working on that too.
Yeah. Had she been involved in
Yes,
the local
she had.
educational
Yes, she had.
concern group? Yeah.
Right.
So when you came in, your concern kind of fit in with something that was happening
That's right.
statewide almost. I mean, your issue was very timely.
Right, it was.
Yeah.
And also, I was identified early as being interested in education, and then with Sarah Lynn getting the appointment, we were able to coordinate a lot of things. I was on the education committee, and that gave, it was a good opportunity for me to know what was going on from that angle too. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us both to have input on something that we felt was a vital concern to the state.
You got on the education committee
The first year,
time.
and I've been on there for 14 years.
Yeah. Is that an appointment that you sought?
Yes, I asked for that.
How did you go about getting that?
I went to the speaker right after I was elected and gave him a list of the committees that I wanted to be on. And he usually gave you one that you wanted, and he did give me that one.
Yeah.
Another one that I was on was, that he appointed me to, was agriculture. And my husband said, when he found out that I had gotten that appointment, said, well, you're not really in the legislature, you're in the Army. They're going to put you in the most alien spot. But that turned out to be a very good spot for me to be in, because I got acquainted with people all over the state and interested in their problems. And as I pointed out to them, most of us who lived in Sandy Springs, which was a suburban area, were just 1 or 2 generations away from the farm. So we were interested in their problems.
Yeah.
And they helped me then at a later time, in a couple of years. The next year, really, after about the 2nd or 3rd year, I was in there on some legislation pertaining to just Sandy Springs.
Yeah. And the speaker at that, when you went in, was Tom Murphy.
It was, and he had just been the speaker a year.
Yeah. So he was
He was new.
rather fresh
Uh-huh.
and new at that
That's right. Uh-huh.
position. Though he had been in the legislature.
Oh, yes,
For some
for
time
18 years,
before
I
that.
think, before then,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Now, before we get into your legislative career, I think there's time to ask before the tape runs out. When you ran for office for the next term,
Mhm.
you've made a career really in the House.
And I don't really believe in, quote, making a career
Yeah.
of politics.
Uh-huh.
I think if anybody goes through college and says, I'm gonna be governor, and making a career, then you're kind of self-serving, and I think you ought to, but it's worked out that I have stayed in.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's not what you intended to do, but
Well, you don't, I
necessarily.
think that in a lot of things like this, I felt that if anything, I felt like I was able to be involved in things that made a difference. But I also knew that there were other avenues that I could pursue if that wasn't open to make a contribution. And I think that the way I was brought up was that you went into government to perform a service rather than for it to be anything that you were going to get anything out of. And I think we've lost some of that at this point in time in training people.
Yeah. When you ran for office for each term after that, did you conduct your campaign differently in the sense
Not
that
really.
now you were an incumbent? You had a different base
Uh-huh.
to run from?
Oh, we did it about the same way, really. The next, let's see, I believe the first election, I had a Democrat the next two times I ran.
You had challenges in the general election.
Uh-huh, and let's see, in 76, was that when Carter was
Yeah.
elected? All right, then I had someone that came in like 30 minutes before qualifying closed, and he decided that since I didn't have anybody running, that he would go in on Carter's coattails. He was a Democrat. And I got 75% of the vote.
Yeah.
So, but I did go ahead and conduct a complete campaign. And then the next year, the next election, I had someone else who came in, a Democrat. And I think I got 81% of the vote then I went 3 elections without any opposition.
And none in the primaries.
No. The only primary opposition I ever had was last time. And I had someone who ran against me, but I got about 89.6% of the vote. So
Yeah.
that's the only primary opposition I've had.
Yeah. So you're really you're in a strong position vis-a-vis the constituents.
Well, I think it's
you're
because I have
well
stayed involved in the community, and we've got projects out here that we're working together on.
I had just said, you had just said you won the last time over a Republican challenger in the primary. You got 89.6%
something like
of
that.
the vote, and I said, you're very well liked in this constituency, in this district, and you said,
Well, there's no other government figure, and I try to, when people call me, to help them, if it's the government, the Fulton County government or the federal government, to get them to the right people.
yeah,
And because I have felt concerned that we needed to establish government as a responsible unit of our society, and that needed all of our authority figures, I think, had crumbled. Were crumbling, during since the 60s.
yeah.
Everything was questioned. So, and I've stayed in touch with the people.
So you're now known in this district as the person to call with whatever problems that
Just
they think
about.
government can solve, and then you route
And
them
people
to
will
the
call
proper level.
women legislators too about problems that they won't call men to.
Really?
So I try to to, be responsive and make sure that they get in contact with the people they need to.
That is a finding. That is something we're finding in our research, that women representatives are perceived as and do act more for their constituents. That they really do receive a lot of calls and really take care of their constituents. Are the constituents that call more women than men also, or is it kind of an even
No,
mix?
I don't think so.
Pretty much even mix.
It might even be more
Or
men.
more men?
I don't have a constituency, of course, that requires a lot of the services from the state,
Yeah.
like those who have folks that are getting AFDC checks and stuff like that. But nevertheless, but these people out here, mainly, as I say, a lot of the problems that people have out here with the county commission and trying to get them to be responsive.
Yeah, on development issues.
Well, on zoning and,
Zoning.
even, the street lights out and stuff like that,
Yeah.
or signs or whatever. And so I've tried to call the person that they need to contact and have that person call them from the county, because that was one of my pet peeves, was that government.
So, technicalities.
Right.
Now we were. Okay, we were talking about your constituency, the kinds of things they
And the
contact
people
you
are.
on. Yeah. Let's start now talking about other relationships that have affected what you do in the legislature, and we have been talking about the constituency. Could you talk about your constituency in relation to the things that you actually can do in the state legislature?
What my constituents have been mainly concerned about is that we not be annexed to the city of Atlanta.
Does that continue?
That's continual. That's a big concern, and I guess about the second or third year, I've forgotten the dates on all of this. Atlanta, I think, had there was the move to do that, and then George Busby appointed a Fulton County, Blue Ribbon Fulton County Tax Study Commission, and he appointed 5 legislators, and I was one of those, and the rest of there were 20, and we studied all the forms of government. There are actually 11 governments in Fulton County, and the recommendations came out that some of the recommendations were to put this area in a tax district, and there was even one, I guess that was before this, there was a study that was done through the Fulton County delegation that wanted to annex this area. So what we did in the area was to go on the offensive, and instead of just fighting annexation, we came with the idea, which was my bill, to incorporate the area in the city of Sandy Springs. And as we were unable to get it through because it's local legislation. At that point there were 24 members in the Fulton County delegation, and only 5 of us represented the unincorporated area. But we were also able, though, to defeat the annexation move by that. And I got, before I introduced the bill, even though it was a local bill, I got over 99 signatures of people on the bill. So, if the bill had gotten to the floor of the House, we could have passed it.
Yeah.
So,
I have a research assistant. The project has a research assistant who has gone and retrieved the kind of legislative record on each of the people we're interviewing, all the bills that they've been associated with. And in reviewing those before I talked with you, I did notice that that was one thread that is woven through all of your terms in the legislature, this concern with annexation and incorporation. So that's interesting that that's continued. It almost sounds as if there's a standoff so that this area won't be annexed, but it also won't be incorpoted.
Well, that's
But
kind
there's
of the way it is.
Balance there that.
That's right. We
Well,
actually
nothing.
now have enough votes in the delegation to prevent annexation, but we don't. We have enough votes to block, but not enough votes to pass it.
Yeah.
We hope to go. We have another motivation or another way to achieve our motivation of incorporation out here, which we'll try later on.
Yeah. What about your relationship now with the political party, with the Republican Party in this
You mean
district
this
or in the state?
now?
Oh,
Well, what I did was, after I won the seat, then the people that were in the political party, that we are in the Republican Party, were organized by House district. So the House district chairman, that election came up the next February. And so we had enough people to go in and take over the whole party, but as it turned out, we had a compromise candidate that group, and we kind of worked that out. I had a meeting here to do that, and a lot of the people that were on, quote, the other side by that time were seeing to it that it helped to open up the party and and that we all really were working for the good of the cause, and that so they came around, I would say, the majority, all but maybe 3 or 4. And then it was probably about 6 years after that I was able to really get the people who had worked in my campaign to go ahead and run for and take over the, quote, the party offices.
Yeah.
They were interested in the election, but they didn't want to play party politics and weren't that interested. So since then, we've been able to have people who were interested in doing the party post, and and we've been able to have an influence on the county and on the state who's elected, and it kind of cleaned up the Republican Party.
Yeah. Does that affect what you can do in the legislature?
You mean
What happens in your House district and then in your whole state party? I know the
Not
Republican
really.
Party is a minority party in the state legislature, so I guess
Not
I'm asking,
really.
how important is your party connection for your work in the legislature?
When I first went in, Mike Egan was the minority leader, and open meetings was the issue at that point. And I know Mike had it worked out so there were going to be 3 or 4 speakers, and I, as a freshman, was the one selected to speak. It turned out that, again, they reached a compromise and we didn't go that route. But on the state level at that point, I was well accepted when I went in. And then, as I say, the people out here have gotten involved in the party and have had a big influence and have been able to change certainly the 5th, and the majority of had other people in other areas who've had similar views are now in control of the party, so that a narrow one issue group does not control the party, that it is a party that's interested in good government and is the loyal opposition. But the actual organization of people out here who are Republicans per se do not come down as a group or anything and lobby, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, I didn't really have anything in mind. I was just kind of asking, how does it affect
Right.
what you do there?
I think that those of us who are real Republicans understand well, within the Republican Party organization, there's always been a group who kind of want to go along to get along with, let's don't challenge the Democrats. Then there's another group that feel more strongly you need to challenge as many points as possible. And so we've gone through that evolution. Mike Egan was excellent about doing that in a way that was confrontational but also effective, not arrogant or not.
You mean about bringing up
issues that needed to be brought up on the floor.
And now who is Paul Coverdale?
Paul Coverdale is the minority leader of the Senate, and Johnny Isaacson is the minority leader of the House. But intervening after Mike Egan was, and you all probably should interview him because he had an interesting record, and then went under with Griffin Bell to Washington as associate Attorney General when under the Carter administration. But he was an excellent example of a legislator because he was so competent in all areas and was a good person to be our mentor, which he really was. Herb Jones of Savannah was the minority leader after him, and then Johnny Isaacson has been minority leader for 6 years.
What about your relationship with the press? Is that an important relationship for you as a legislator?
I've always had a good relationship with the press, and I think it's because I know how to deal with them, and I don't expect them to run my campaign and to give me a lot of publicity during the campaign.
Right now, are you talking about the Atlanta Constitution?
I'm mainly
more local.
More local, because they covered, and now the Atlanta Journal Constitution has the North Fulton Extra, which makes that local. And so I think that because I had the journalism background and with the neighborhood paper, it helps them to have things well prepared. That it's made their job easier for me to give them press releases from time to time that are easy for them to adapt
to use
to their style.
What do you consider your local
newspaper? It's the Sandy Springs Neighbor and the North Fulton Extra of the Atlanta Journal Constitution.
Okay. What about your relationships with the governor? And now we've had Busby and then Harris. While you've been,
I've had really good relationships with both of the governors. Or George Busby wouldn't have appointed my nominee. We did, though, during this tax study commission came out, had 7 recommendations, and some were dealing with putting part of Sandy Springs in a taxing district, which we considered not to our favor. And actually, the speaker and the people in the House helped me and Melton Ferris also worked on it, but we defeated them statewide. So I had, which was not to George Busby's liking, but we had to do what we thought was right, and so I had good cooperation of people to do that. I think that then we had the reapportionment trial, which was, and I was one of 2 Republicans on the reapportionment committee. And that's when we had a lot of confrontationals and became very partisan down there, and I kind of had to lead the attack because I just happened to be in the position to do that.
Did you seek that appointment?
Yes, I did. I live in a growth area, and I changed to the reapportionment committee and to state planning, which is in community affairs. State planning, community affairs, because all local legislation goes through there, and all of the changes in government, local government, go through there. And I also changed at I first asked for the reapportionment assignment, and then the chairman of that year, after I'd been in 6 years, asked the speaker for me to be able to be appointed to his committee because he needed more conservatives on the committee. And I had wanted that. So I made 2 changes after my 6th year, beginning my 4th term.
We'll talk about some of those things in a little bit, I'm sure. What about your relationship? Well, what about Governor Harris?
Oh, well, I've always gotten along well with Governor Harris. Elizabeth and I, she's a Methodist, and is we've kind of had a common denominator there. And Joe Frank is always, I felt really, quite welcome to go and discuss anything with him, and he's easy to discuss things with. And I helped him on, have been able to help him on some subcommittees, particularly in state planning, to get bills out that other people, that Democrats wouldn't help him on. So I've helped him several times on things.
Yeah, has his QBE effort been something that?
Oh yes, that I very much was in favor of.
Group is still interested.
And several people from this area were on that committee. And Joe Frank set out the Mondale election, and really identified with a lot of the Republican causes anyway.
I suspected that.
Yeah.
Observing. Yeah. Now, what about the legislative leaders? And you've already mentioned the minority floor leaders in the House and the Senate. Could you talk about how you work with both the minority and the majority floor leader in the House?
Well, in the majority leader of I don't know that we all work that closely with him, who are members of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Of course, through that position, they lead the discussion on several key bills. But there has always, when I went in, there was always a close working relationship with both parties. We were very, I think, nonpartisan, and didn't and probably too. Another woman went in when I was elected for the first time. That was Republican, and then I think maybe 3 or 4 other Democratic women. And the Republican women, and those that have come in since, have been better received because they were identified as more conservative and not radical women's livers, which I think was a little testy for some of the conservative rural legislators.
You think some of the Democratic women who came in were perceived in that way?
Oh yes, definitely.
As opposed to the Republican women being perceived as more conservative.
Right.
Yeah.
And we really got better committee assignments even. In fact,
Quote,
the
unquote,
second
fit in
year.
better.
That's right. And in fact, my second term, the speaker was challenged for his position by for speaker by
Burrs?
Al Burris,
Yeah.
right? And so the Republicans even had, I became a subcommittee chairman. There became 3 classes of people. There were those that voted for the speaker, who were the first, and then the Republicans, and then those that didn't vote for the speakers. We didn't have to get involved in that because that was a race within there.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of activities going on back there because the speaker was new, and all kind of things were being established for the first time.
Yeah. Maybe that's the next group was other members of the General Assembly. You've already mentioned some of them in talking about. Are there other particular members of the General Assembly? For example, the county delegation, your local delegation, or other women, or the Black Caucus that you could talk about?
Well, the
the women, from time to time, we have considered forming a women's caucus. In fact, did go as far as to draw up the bylaws. The speaker basically, though, this was about 8 years ago, threatened one of the Democratic women, kind of in a threatening way, not to go that route. And so we haven't gone ahead and done that. We did, though, my first year, we did get the women behind the kindergarten bill. And we've voted together on some things, but there's not a formal women's caucus. I've always tried to be helpful to the new women that come in and see to it that they learn the ropes. And but in the blacks, the Fulton County delegation has probably as many women and as many blacks as any delegation. It's the largest delegation. And I really am not at all motivated racially to discriminate against anybody. I wasn't raised where we that way at all. And so that hasn't been a problem. I've been able to judge people as individuals and have gotten along well with the blacks.
Yeah, have you worked for certain pieces of legislation, say that the Black Caucus is
Yes.
behind?
My local bill that in fact, I delayed it to begin with. I was blocked the first year because Julian Bond and Horace Tate had traded off their vote with, and there was a member of the Fulton County School Board who was elected to the Senate the same year I was elected, and he was against that. So he was able to keep the bill from being passed over there. So finally we waited till after reapportionment and worked closely with the NAACP and because they're the ones that wanted to wait until reapportionment. So they were behind that.
And then did your bill go
Yes,
through?
then it passed.
Yeah. Do you know if the speaker, quote unquote, threatened the Black Caucus about forming, or is that really
I
a
don't
different
know about
situation?
that. And maybe threat was a little too heavy a word to
quotes
use.
around it.
Yeah.
I detected it was like
Or I guess advised this person to.
advised strongly.
That's right, that he didn't want that. I don't know whether that, what has been, the Black Caucus, interesting enough, contacted the Republican caucus, and I'm now chairman of the Republican caucus last year, and and they felt like that they had not gotten anything just because they were Democrats. And they felt that there might be things that we could cooperate and coordinate on good government and reform together at some time in the future. So I think they're becoming more sophisticated and better organized. And all of us know, just my grassroots support group, that when people get together, you can accomplish more. And that's why the communist form of government does not allow any volunteer associations to form, is because you can keep people away from one another and their mutual interests won't be developed.
Yeah. Coming back to the women, even though there's not a formal women's caucus, would you say there is still an informal network that
Yes,
sometimes is more latent
yes,
than other times?
Yes, and there are among the women there were a couple who absolutely did not want to be associated with just women, and there were a couple who were women's livers who have been very motivated to do their agenda and were very self-seeking and would sometimes we used to meet for lunch. Some of them even took some of the other women's legislation and introduced it before they did, and it's something they discussed or done some research on. So women are not just because they're women going to be just as honorable and but overall I would think that after being to a lot of national conferences and things like that, most women have come from the background of being involved with the community and are motivated from that rather than running as men do. Most of them run because it's just another accomplishment, another bag to bear in the macho society. And most women run because they have something that they're interested in accomplishing. Up until that's changing somewhat.
Yeah.
I now see some women who are just as egotistically inclined to do it for their own ego as men.
To make careers.
Yes, that's
Well,
right.
career seems to have a kind of dirty connotation,
Right.
like politician for some people.
I know it.
So, you can think of a career of service, or you can
That's
think
right.
of a self-serving career,
That's
as
right.
you said earlier. So I guess it means different things
It does.
to different people. Now, coming around to what you've done subject matter wise in the legislature, we've talked about your committee assignments, and you've talked about some that you have tried to get on. What would you consider your most important committee assignments? We may have already covered this, but
Well, the committees I'm on are the ones that I'm most satisfied. They're the ones that serve my area particularly well. I think that to be on the Appropriations Committee has always been a committee that a lot of people wanted to be on, but the Appropriations Committee does not have that much input in the House. Just about 6 people really develop our budget, and so it's an area where you would have a lot of people contacting you to do all of these things, and you really wouldn't have the opportunity to do it. So it would be, and if you're a Democrat, you don't really even have the right to question that much without kind of going against the authorities.
the speaker,
yeah.
or the Green Door Committee.
Yeah, that's right, the old Green Door
Or is
Committee.
that the same thing?
Well, it's kind of the same thing. And then the Republicans can raise questions on that, so I think you're a little freer to question.
It's kind of a legitimate,
Yeah, that's right.
expected difference that can
Yes,
emerge. Yeah, that's interesting. But you're saying really you're not on the Appropriations
No,
Committee,
and don't see any reason to be at this point.
Yeah. Given the way it's structured
That's
and
right.
works.
Yeah.
So do you place any of your committees above others in importance, or you say they all serve your
Well, it just
needs
depends.
for your constituents?
Probably for my particular area, State Planning and Community Affairs is the most important committee for me to be on, and reapportionment when we reapportion.
When it happens.
Which is coming up again.
Yeah. Very.
Yes, we're already starting.
It seems like it just happened.
I know it, but we're going to have another
starting
census.
again. Yeah. And did you get these other assignments the same way you got your first education committee
By
assignment?
going in and
going to
discussing it with the speaker, yes.
And basically he's granted you.
That's right.
Is your impression that he mostly does grant what people want? Or?
No, not necessarily. When you're new, he tries to give you, I think, at least one. But some people that come in, he, I don't know. I think, some people feel like that they ran against and beat some of the speakers' good friends or something. They don't get as many committee assignments. But truthfully, playing the game like the rules that we follow down there, the winner does take all, and the speaker, that's his authority. And I've always been an advocate for limiting the terms of the speaker, and it's not really just motivated because of who the speaker is. I just think that Anytime you have that much authority, then it does need to be broken up somewhat, because the speaker can have, and does, I think, more authority and impact than probably anybody in the state, and yet just runs in a district. And that's not the best form, I think, for our particular government to be a true republic.
It reminded me almost of the Prime Minister in England. The Prime Minister is a member of the House of
That's
Commons
right.
and runs from a district, but is the head of the party, really.
That's right.
And has great power.
And the government is actually, the cabinet is drawn from the parliamentary, the legislative branch, as it turns out.
I'm not sure we could draw
No.
many more comparisons, but it just
That's
struck me
it.
when
It
you
is.
said that. Gosh.
That's it.
And what kinds of legislation have been of greatest concern to you?
Local legislation, things that dealt with Atlanta, Fulton County, and things that along that line. Public housing. I had a public housing bill that would require more opportunity for citizen input, and I have advocated and have had several bills on requiring the state to get involved in zoning and zoning procedures and things like that. The state is not ready to do that, and we even turned down as a body some fairly just some bills that would lead into that direction this time. But I did discuss with the governor to appoint this growth strategy commission and encouraged him to do that, because we really do need to address these problems. We're one of only, in fact, we're the only state that does not require either land use planning or zoning procedures prescribed from the state level. And so zoning should be a local problem, but you do need to have guidelines. So I have had lots of bills that I have introduced to address this, things that have to do with unincorporated areas, so that after certain demographics are met, that they would have the opportunity to incorporate, so you won't have to go through the local delegation. And the way we handle local legislation, I think, needs to be changed, because we do have a group as we've discussed within the Fulton County delegation that can block this area of 60,000 people of being able to have a responsive, accountable form of government. And so I've done a 50-state study to see how local legislation is handled in other states, and there are some changes that we should be making along those lines. So that's a slow process, but maybe, some of particularly the things to do with addressing some of the needs in zoning and land use, I think will come out of the Growth Strategy Commission, and my area has been one that's been affected most because of this, since we had a county commission who dealt with growth and zoning, and with very little local input. That's been a real problem, and also we've made a lot of mistakes that other counties shouldn't make.
What about your concern with education?
I've always been real active on the education committee, and real involved in that. I mainly through committee work. I was subcommittee chairman for a health education committee about maybe 10 years ago, something like that, and we went around the state and determined the different types of health education programs that were in the school to let this be made available to the other school systems. But I have felt strongly that the person from this area needed to see to it that other parts of the state was well educated too. We support education through our own tax dollar here, and actually spend a lot of money, particularly with QBE, that we send to other school systems. So it's to our advantage to educate people in this state, and there's never been what I consider the real appreciation for education in Georgia, and there has not been the emphasis on education. And I know when I first ran, I had the statistic that we had more people incarcerated than any state in the union per capita, and we still do. And I just spoke or was at a child care conference last week, and the governor of Minnesota mentioned that they graduated 95% of the students that entered high school, and they also had the lowest incarceration rate. Well, see, we have a big dropout rate, and we also are fifth highest in number of teenage pregnancies. So these are some problems that I'm in the future I'm going to address child care and teenage pregnancy as something that I feel we need to get to.
Yeah. What would you? What has been your biggest success, looking back and thinking of what you've done in the legislature so far? What has been your greatest satisfaction or in accomplishment? You know, what have you been able to accomplish that you have tried to accomplish?
My involvement in education and through the emphasis in the education committee and through Saralyn on the state school board, and then getting the elected school board, which was approved in this area with 75% of the vote, and so and then that completely reorganized our Fulton County school system. So I guess that's probably the thing I am most proud of.
Yeah, I remember in your legislative history that those were some of the things that you started introducing or working. You know, were co-sponsor or chief sponsor of bills like this. So you've seen them finally come to fruition.
Right.
They didn't happen right away, did they?
No, because we had the problem of having someone that blocked it. It had to be local legislation, and it was blocked in the Senate by the member of the school board who was in the Senate.
How do you interpret that? As someone with a kind of entrenched interest, not wanting to see change happen?
I think a legitimate difference of opinion. I liked him, and we got along fine. It just didn't agree on that issue.
Yeah. And that happened to be your issue.
That was one of my main issues, right. But now he was on the reapportionment committee from the Senate, and I was on the reapportionment committee. We worked, well on all of that.
Yeah.
Also on the reapportionment committee, that was a trying, literally, figuratively, and literally situation.
Tried in the courts, you mean.
That's right. And I was one that was subpoenaed and had to give a deposition, which was supposed to just be a couple hours, which went all day, which did help the United States government win their case, stating that there was some discrimination in drawing the congressional lines, and as a result, we were able to redraw a district which met the guidelines of the Justice Department, so we didn't discriminate against the blacks, and as a payoff, we were able to draw a district that in the northern part of Fulton County and DeKalb County that elected a Republican. So that was a good little byproduct, and the Republicans and the blacks worked together closely on that.
And it was after this past reapportionment
Yes.
you're talking about. Then what, in 80?
Yes,
or
and
did
we
it
did
affect
actually.
the 82 election?
It was actually.
For Congress.
It was actually, we drew it in 81, and then in 82 was the first election
So
after that.
you saw the results in 82?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
82 was the year. Well, Fowler went on.
Fowler went on,
For a
and
couple
the black.
more
That's
terms.
right. There was kind of an informal agreement,
Yeah.
but they had enough to go ahead, and Fowler went on until 2 years ago,
till
I guess.
86.
Uh-huh.
And then in the fourth, Levitus
Was defeated
was defeated by Swindle in
That's right.
which year?
I think in 82.
82, right
Uh-huh.
after this revolution.
Right. Uh-huh.
So you consider those are the things that you
Yes.
look back and,
Uh-huh.
and say
Uh-huh. That I had a
you
real input on
Yeah.
that. Uh-huh.
were able to accomplish something.
That's right. Uh-huh.
Could you say, on the other hand, what's been your greatest disappointment so far? Has there been any great disappointment so far?
I think that you can't sit down there and for 40 days and not see that we could be doing more.
Mhm.
That we haven't addressed the problems. That we still have so many. Our prison system is in better condition, but that's always bothered me. That we've had all these people incarcerated. The fact that we still are not. That we have all of the byproducts of a poor educational system. So it bothers me that we are not aggressive enough and that we're still not putting as much in education, even though we have QBE. States like North Carolina are putting like 74% of their state budget, and we're still doing a lot of things with our state budget that county governments should be spending money for, like the carpet center in Dalton, and things that are just pork barrel kind of things. That bothers me.
So you mentioned this a while ago. You really want to carry your education concern now kind of statewide and show how it relates to
Right.
the problem of crime,
Right.
the problem of incarceration.
Right. Uh-huh. Yes. This
That
is
if we had better education and better
right.
child services and those kinds of things, we should see a drop
That's right.
in
We need to.
crime.
That's right. Well,
And-
that's right. And the
and
quality of life
incarceration,
and mental illness, drug use, because a person who is not educated, as you know, they do not have, they can't read and write even, or they can't. And I think it's 70% of our prisoners are considered functioning illiterates. Well, then they don't have any other opportunity.
Right.
Also, they don't do more than or be able to cope, just to get along, and their biological needs is their whole motivation. And so it's inhumane what we do, but it also is not economically responsible.
Yeah.
It's not the best way for us to go.
And then looking at yourself as a legislator among other legislators, what do you feel your impact has been as a representative?
On my colleagues, or
as a legislator among others,
among other people
among
in our
other
society.
legislators, among other legislators, what do you feel your impact has been in the legislature, I guess I'm saying?
I have found that from the beginning that women in the legislature, and I have always been considered an equal and respected as a person. And I think that I'm identified as having the courage of my convictions, and I feel strongly you have to develop convictions, that you and I are not going to die for one another's convictions, but if we feel strongly enough about it, you're willing to go ahead and take the stands that you have to take from time to time on things. And like another education issue I recall was taking the stand against the teaching of creationism in the school, which there was a large lobby again for that. But it was not educationally sound, and I believe strongly in the separation of church and state. But I think that most people know I have courage and will stand up for certain things along the way. And I've noticed too that the men will ask me a lot of questions, new people particularly, that they won't ask a man because, well, men are just, I guess, supposed to know in our society, and they don't. And even sitting around me, sometimes I'll ask questions that lawyers or something will say, why don't you ask that question, because it would embarrass them to think they wouldn't, that they didn't know.
It wouldn't be all right for them to
It
look
would
like
be,
they need
that's
to
right,
ask a
that's
question,
right.
but it's all right for a woman
too.
to look
So,
like she needs to.
that's right. So that's something we're we're going to probably grow out of too.
Yeah. You've already begun to answer the next question, which is what about your impact as a woman in the state legislature? But would you go on and say something more about now thinking of yourself as a woman?
Right.
What's it been like to be
A woman,
a woman
in the legislature.
In the legislature?
Well, I was surprised that our quote was not really discriminated against. Women, though, do have different ways, I think, that they need to lobby, and I think that they're learning how to lobby women. We now have some women lobbyists, and one of them took all of us out to dinner. We've had, in the past, we've had one or two lobbyists that maybe each year will take all the women, and we enjoy that. That's
are these lobbyists on quote unquote women's issues?
No,
These...
one was the lobbyist for the Catholic Church. That's the only church that has a formal lobbyist, and he had been president of a college and had worked closely with education and was a real contribution. Then he got involved in some political situation, and after that the women wouldn't go because of because it became had the political overtones. He got involved in some issues that were really not just education, and it was more personal. Then the oil industry has a woman lobbyist who's very effective this time that has done that, that invited everybody out to dinner. But women legislators, when you go to a national meeting, the men can't wait to go and see what all the local yokels are kind of doing. I'm generalizing that somewhat. And, they scan out the area pretty well. Women legislators really just have fun doing things that women enjoy doing. We'll go maybe eat at ice cream sundae and shop or something like that, or go to a play and take in some of the cultural events along the way.
Do most of the women in the Georgia General Assembly go to the national meetings?
There are some that most of them do.
Do most of the legislators go?
No, not most of them don't. But there are and again there's the National Conference of State Legislators meeting, and then there are the Rutgers University through their women's study program last November, and 4 years before that invited all women legislators. And so, but I'd say half of them do.
Yeah. Did you go to the Rutgers?
Yes, I did. Both of them.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah. What did they do at that meeting?
They discussed how to be the support systems and study programs on particular issues that would be addressed in the state legislature. Kind of a training session and an update, a sharing of ideas. Also, that was one of the most, and both times, partisan things that I've attended, and so we as the Republican Party both times tried to see to it that we had as many Republican women there as the Democratic women did, because nationally the Democratic women are, and also we were being very protective too of our Republican president, who the Democratic liberal has been aggressively
moving in the direction. And so we wanted to make sure that we're able to defend our cause.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I take the party line on everything, but I've felt particularly pleased about the economic progress that we've created 14.5 million new jobs while Reagan has been president, and that's helped us in this state so much because of the economic policies, and to me that's what it should be, rather than a lot of these other issues that are brought up.
Yeah. You said that as a woman you were surprised that you had not been discriminated against.
Right.
What had you been expecting?
Well, I guess when I went in, I expected, I never felt, the Equal Rights Amendment was a big deal when I went in, and I did not take a strong position either way. Had said I'd vote as the majority of my people wanted me to, simply because I felt that I was elected by men and women both, and didn't just come that way. I didn't feel discriminated against. I had a twin brother, as I mentioned, and a younger brother, and have 2 sons and a husband, and I'd lived in a man's world, so I didn't really feel discriminated against. I do now, though, after being in 14 years, think that women now are more discriminated against than they were when we first went in. To begin with, we weren't a challenge then. And now, the Democratic women that came in when I did, none of them are committee chairs, and some of the men that we came in with are. And so when you actually, and I think the young women coming out of college now have the opportunities that I didn't when I came out on, and so they're more of a challenge to the male society. And so I think that's same now. Now, being a member of the Republican Party, our procedure in most states, and I don't disagree with it, the Democratic Party has the committee chairs. But I do think that's been a little unfair for the Democratic women, and I think that's something that should be addressed. And I was elected 2 years ago chairman of the Republican caucus, which was a long way for the first time that either caucus had elected a woman chairman. In fact, the Democratic caucus has never had a woman as any officer. We have a woman who is secretary, Ann Mueller, and then Betty Jo Williams 4 years ago had been secretary. So I think that I think the Republican Party is a little more progressive on things like that.
Yeah.
And let me just say, the Republican Party, though, nationally has pushed women to run for the legislature because they felt they could get women who could serve, who had the concept of the free enterprise and the keeping government out of the private sector and deregulation of government, and not trying to deliver everything through a strong centralized government in the concept of the new federalism. And they realize that it's hard sometimes to get people men who are successful to run for office because they either can't afford to or don't want to give up their business to run.
And women.
And women
there are women who are willing to
there are
do
women
that.
who, that's right,
Or able, or
they're
whatever.
able to run, that have been able to, and so the Republican Party has made a real effort to get women to run.
Yeah. You talked about what changes you've seen for women in the state legislature, and they've been negative, really, now that you've been there long enough to see this discrepancy in leadership. Do you think anything can be done about that?
Oh yes, I think that'll eventually.
How do you think that'll kind of work out?
Well,
be
I
worked
think
out?
that it might be worked out. Arlene Sizemore, just at the beginning of this term, was selected. She went in when I did as chairman of a small committee that most of us didn't even know existed, that has 3 people on it. So I would hope that it might be that if we had a strong, if we continue having Tom Murphy, that there's a strong governor that would be able to judge people for their individual qualities. And I don't think a woman ought to get it just because, we need to have a committee chair that's a woman. And I don't think women ought to be elected just because they're women. I think we really do need to elect the best qualified person. And as I said, I've noticed that some of the women that are coming into politics now are just as highly personal agendas as any of the men. So I think but I do think women have been able to bring to the public sector through elective office the grassroots, let's address some of the issues. And there are a lot of issues that are considered women's issues, but they're not any more women's issues than they are men's issues. Child care and teenage pregnancy, this is affecting all of our society.
Right.
And it's just because the press and the men, identify what are the most important issues, and the bank holding bill would be it this year, and it's going to be, another bill. But these are the things that the things that the women are addressing are the more critical issues.
Yeah, that kind of leads into my last question, which is, overall, what would you say your impact as a woman has been in public office? How could you assess your impact as a woman in public office?
I did not take didn't take an active role one way or the other in the Equal Rights Amendment. I did vote for it. But I had felt that what I could do best for women was to be as competent and responsible, and that would help women. I have helped women when I see women need help along the way more than men, and have advised them in running for office. I've encouraged people to run. In fact, Sally Newville, who ran for the state senate last time and was elected from this district, had worked with me before that, and I certainly helped Sally. And so I've encouraged women who were competent and had the time and the education to do it, to run for office. But have done the same thing really for men that I knew of.
Yeah.
I think that probably it has encouraged, I think, some of our young women for us to have gone ahead and to have run. In fact, I know I was at a meeting several years ago, and a commissioner from New York said that she and her son were together, and he was a small 4 or 5 year old, and he said, going over the different occupations, and he said, "Mother, can boys be commissioners?" So we made
That's a real switch.
That's right. We've come a long ways around.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Was there anything else that you'd like to say?
I guess that probably the most traumatic thing was that has happened to me during my 14 years was the reapportionment trial, testifying on that, and being the only Republican. And I don't know whether any of the blacks that testified came back or not, but I know I was the only Republican that came back to the House. A couple were moved to the Senate. One was defeated. One decided not to run. And we had also that year had elected, the Republicans had elected a Republican senator, and it became very partisan. And I was the one that was basically identified as the one who was responsible for a lot of that, and was actually, I think maybe some of the leadership in the House had said they didn't want any of my bills to pass, and that they weren't even, maybe not to, I think there was even an emphasis to try to snub me and to, and but that's worked. I decided, well, that was a lot of people in our society assume that role, and I mean have to are discriminated against. So I thought, well, that won't hurt me. I'll see how I handle this, and it worked out. I thought to my advantage, and to the point now that last year at the end of the session, the speaker came by and said, "Well, Ms. Felton, we're really getting along well now," and has been very cooperative with me. So it's kind of worked itself out by not. As I say, I didn't. That's one of those things you just have to. You have to do, and at least I had to tell the truth. And I thought it was going to cost me my seat at the time, but I just felt like I'd been in the legislature for 8 years, and that was, the price of that was worth the price to go ahead and do what you had to do, and when you're under oath, I know I remember a man in the grocery store said, "Well, why did you tell them those things?" And I said, "Because I was under oath, and it was the truth."
It's what you're supposed to do.
That's right. That's right.
Isn't it?
That's right. So, and then I noticed that there were even people in my party, and I was kind of the one that had to lead the fight on that, who were inclined to be careful about the legislation they maybe co-sponsored with me that year, after the big fight occurred, or to do that, and that was a disappointment. But nevertheless, those were scattered individuals, but overall, I think that it helps to get involved, and that you feel better about the situation when you know that you have some input. You have to tell yourself that you're not going to move mountains, and you can't always see that you're making progress. And but I think that when things get really bad and you think, what in the world are we accomplishing in there? Sometimes you think, well, at least there's no one in this seat that is down there for their own special interest in promoting just their business or something. At least the seat still belongs to the people, and it's not you're keeping one of those kind of people out when things get really rough. At other times you realize that there are so many things that need to be done, and there are not enough hours in the day, and you have to say, okay, I can do something about this, and I can't save the whole world, but I can do a little bit. And then you find that other people are working on these other things, and it all comes together. And I have found that there are people in both political parties who are very dedicated, who are in the legislature, and who are not seeking to be committee chairmen and to be in leadership, but that are just there to represent their people. And I think maybe we don't give those people enough credit, because they are the backbone of that legislature. And when you're not really involved in carrying heavy legislation, then you're a little freer to vote how you want to, because if you have an important bill coming up, you've got to be careful that you don't have a lot of negative votes against somebody's, most of them are not real important bills, but you don't want to make any body upset with just you may be voting on their amendments. So they serve a real purpose by not having a lot of legislation. And my district has never been one that wanted just legislation introduced. In fact, I've had numerous people say, take a law off the books, don't put one on. But also, I think the people that in the legislature that choose and are consciously or unconsciously not selected to be leaders often serve their people better, because it takes a lot of time to be a committee chairman. And if they had a district that had a lot of constituent problems, and maybe just jumping in and addressing the problems that I see that are unaddressed, you don't have time to do that sometimes.
If you're in a leadership position.
That's right. You're functioning as doing just the management of a committee, and then handling your own private business, as most of the committee chairmen are men who are employed.
Okay, well, thank you
Well,
very much.
thank you. I enjoyed it.
It's been fun, and educational.
Well, you were sweet to come out here and to do this.